Hello, I'm Bob Ganzak, and this is Motivation U, the podcast. Hello, welcome to Motivation U, the podcast. We are here at the Coach's Podcast Room inside Spurrier's Gridiron Grill at Celebration Point, Gainesville, Florida, enjoying an incredible Chamber of Commerce Day. With me today is a young man that I have not seen for 25 years, a good friend of mine, and I just call him the Chief. Dan Robinson. Dan, welcome.
Thank you, Bob. A young man.
Yes.
We both had hair in those days.
Not me.
That's true. You were always a little thin.
You did. I didn't. Dan and I met back in the early 90s. Dan was chief of police at Lincoln Township.
Lincoln Township. Yeah.
In a small little blurb, beautiful little area right on Lake Michigan in the southwestern corner of the state of Michigan, which was just a beautiful place to live. I mean, it's some incredible things. We were half hour, 40 minutes to Notre Dame's campus, and just a great time.
Hour and a half from Chicago.
Hour and a half from Chicago, yes. Yeah. It was a beautiful place to live. But your world has changed, and we're going to get into all of that and the leadership that surrounds it. Dan, this program is about leadership. Sure. We talk about leadership, about motivation, about living an intentional life. The leadership side of it, it was always a curiosity to me that you did not have to be the CEO of a Fortune 100 company in order to be a great leader. Yeah, are they great leaders? Yes. Many great leaders live down the street from you. You and I know many that we met through that were high school football coaches, right. In different things. And those are the people that I try to uncover on this show. And our podcast is on Facebook Live right now, YouTube Live. We are on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you find your podcasts, like 39 different places you can go to find podcasts. And we're trying to find those individuals that really are local people that make a difference in people's lives. It doesn't matter if you make a difference in 5 people's lives running a Dollar General, or if you're running CSX and you make a difference in thousands of people's lives. You're still making that difference, and we want to uncover that. So you're with Sierra Wireless.
Correct.
What is, who is, and how did you get connected with Sierra Wireless?
Well, it's part of the overall journey. But first, let me say thank you for having me, Bob. I'm humbled to be here, and very much appreciate the offer to share with your audience and to connect with you again after so many years. Yeah. Even though we're not too far away from each other, it seems impossible to get together sometimes.
Yes.
How I ended up at Sierra Wireless really was an adventure that started back coming out of high school and going into law enforcement. That I can go back in time and talk about the people that have influenced the pathway for me and gave me the tools that enabled me to capture the best that I could capture in that pathway along the journey to get here today. But I really had some spare time. I had done a startup, a company called AHOC, which is a crisis communication solution that was later purchased by BlackBerry as BlackBerry rediscovered itself and kind of moved away from handset devices and went into more software security, MDM type security,
So it's
manager.
all that same path from the law enforcement.
It all came out of the technical path that I had.
All right.
I eventually went down in law enforcement. And I spent about 2 months at home after we were acquired and we transitioned everything over to BlackBerry. I had a contract for 18 months with them to work with them to do the transition. And at the end of that period, I was home. And my wife, she's an entrepreneur herself and has some local business interest in Jacksonville. So she was still busy and had no intention of toning that down. So an opportunity came forward to go to work for Sierra. A friend of mine today reached out to me. We didn't know each other at that time, but we've become good friends over time. And he encouraged me to go down this path, and I did. And today I'm the director of public sector sales for the eastern half of the U.S.
So you
for
do a
Sierra
little
Wireless.
traveling and...
Well, since COVID, I've found myself at home and rediscovered what my home office is all about. It's kind of nice, though, to be at home. At first, it was like, oh, I don't know if I can deal with this. You miss the customers, you miss the interaction. But now I've settled in, and the good thing, I have a home office that takes me to another part of the house.
Okay.
On a second level, and it overlooks the back of our house, which is very picturesque. So it gives me something if I get a conference call and I start walking or pacing. I got something,
something to do.
Go look at.
You're
or,
not bumping into somebody else.
Right,
Yeah.
right. So, it's I'm probably have the best of both worlds there, having an office dedicated for my space and also a good view to look at. We are beginning to travel a little bit. I suspect we're a global company.
Okay.
We're one of the largest manufacturers of cellular radio components.
What do they use for? What
It can
is-
be everything from a cellular radio going into your car
Okay.
to going in a desktop computer or a laptop computer, some kind of tablet. I mean, pretty much anything you would put cellular connectivity into. Manufacturers like Cisco and Panasonic and others buy our products to go inside their devices.
Oh, okay.
And then we also make a line of devices, mobile gateways, and that's the division that I'm in. We refer to it as the enterprise division. That division sells mobile gateways for police, fire, EMS.
So what is a
federal
mobile
agents.
gateway for the person?
Sure, it's like a modem that you would take and put into your home and connect it to the internet and then broadcast Wi-Fi and connect Ethernet devices to it, and then that device manages all those connections, what that connection can see, what it can do, how it can pass data. We do that in a mobile environment using cellular capability.
So law enforcement's in their vehicle. They that when we see them on television and that hub that they have there,
Yep.
those are the type
They're
of
mobile,
things.
yeah. It's basically a mobile office that we're creating for them with connectivity. So it could be their computer, it can be their body-worn cameras streaming back to headquarters or to a storage facility, or their in-car camera, their license plate readers that are mounted on vehicles. It's a number of things that it's really it's a mini office for police officers.
Well, that is interesting. I like that. Do you have people that are working under you? Do you manage other
I
individuals?
manage the sales folks on my team for the eastern part of the U.S. I also manage the southeastern territory, Florida, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi. And I deal pretty much with EMS, fire, police, those folks in the field.
How would you, from the days as police chief, which you started as an officer and then worked your way up through the ranks to become the chief of police, how would you, say your leadership style has changed from then till now? What are some of the components of Dan Robinson as a leader chief of police versus Dan Robinson, manager, district manager, or regional manager of Sierra?
You know, I think there's a couple things that, you know, you and I have a fond admiration for Coach Holtz. You know, no disrespect for the UF fans here,
Yes.
but, you know, Coach Holtz was an awesome leader himself. And, you know, I think you and I participated at one time when he did his Do Right series when it first came out. And, you know, that resonated very well with me as a young police chief. I was one of the youngest police chiefs in the state of Michigan to be appointed at age 30 and remained chief in the same organization for 14 years. And generally when a police chief takes over the helm, the longevity is 3 to 5 years, you know, because of politics, other things. I was very comfortable because we started the department there. It was, if you recall, it was ground zero. There was no police agent. Yeah.
At that time.
We didn't even have a pencil and paper to write with on day one. And it was fun. It was enjoyable. But I think that do right comment, you know, and I think you can equate that, you know, do right by your family, do right by your friends, do right with the people that you have contact with every day. If you transition that into public safety, it's do the right thing. And sometimes the right thing's not always going to be the best thing for everybody, but it's the right thing to do. It's the right action to take. And, you know, in law enforcement, you have to be able to look at yourself at the end of the day, look in the mirror and say, boy, this was an ugly day, you know, because some things you're
Whatever
faced
happened,
with,
happened, right?
some things you're faced with aren't good. But if you can look in the mirror at the end of the day and say, that was still a good decision and you feel good about the decision you made, you know, I think that's, you know, that's the service to the community. Transitioning that into the private sector, to me, that's, you know, customer first, you know, make sure your customers are satisfied, you're delivering on the deliverables, you're meeting expectations, and those expectations transition to your employees, to the company, to the organization, to all involved, whether it's your partners or your dealers that are in the field. You have to meet those expectations on a regular basis and continue to just do that right thing. And I think that probably resonated very early with me.
Yeah, that is you know, extremely interesting how they correlate from that standpoint. Because in my mind, talking to so many people in leadership, you know, there's certain things that, you know, when I have students that are in our Dale Carnegie programs that are police officers or sheriff's deputies or former military individuals, well, I can't ask questions. I have to give direct orders. That's the way we are. Yet you're looking at it from a completely different standpoint.
You know, I think one of the best skills as a leader, a salesperson, a police officer is to have that skill to listen. Now, you're eventually going to have to take action, but and sometimes you come into situations, particularly in law enforcement and even in management in the private sector, you have to quickly assess and make a decision and move forward with that decision based on the limited availability of data that you have. But the more data you collect, the more success you're going to have in making that decision.
That's true, yep.
And, you know, I've always felt it important is if you're in a position to listen adequately to what the person is saying or what the group is saying, it really enables you to make a much better decision. And I know, you know, eventually, when you, as a police officer, when you come to a scene, and even as a military person, you're more order-driven there. But as a police officer, when you come to the scene and you got mass chaos, you quickly assess, you start...
Gather all the information.
You gather everything you can, but you start making decisions that are first life-saving, and you prioritize those decisions. And as this chain of events progresses, you can do more listening, and you know, your approach may change or adjust based on the data points that you take in. So.
You're listening to MotivationU, the podcast. We're here at Spurrier's Gridiron Grill at Celebration Point inside the coach's podcast room. This is the head ball coach's own podcast room in here with all of the helmets of every organization he was involved with. I always like to see that. It's fun when my wife watches this, being such a big Bulldog fan, and I get to point to this Gator helmet right here and say, that's kind of cool right there.
I'm looking for that Gamecock helmet up there.
It's up there.
Oh, there it is, over in the corner.
Over there, yep. Yeah. Chief Robinson, Dan mentioned Lou Holtz, Coach Lou Holtz, which there's a fond friendship between Coach Spurrier and Coach Holtz, because of when Holtz left at South Carolina, the person that replaced him was Coach Spurrier. And when you read Coach Spurrier's book, and he talks about how basically Lou Holtz let the cat out of the bag. And well, Dan, when he was police chief in Lincoln Township, and I was going to hold this to the end, but we'll spend some time talking about that. The university, and tell me if I'm wrong in any of these parts, but the University of Notre Dame had two individuals. One of them was a dear friend of ours, Paul Harvey, rest in peace, Paul, that was the bodyguard for all of the Notre Dame coaches from Ara Parseghian through Lou Holtz. And there was always another team that played, and Dan was usually, or almost always, if not always, the individual that was hired to be that individual for the opposing team that was playing Notre Dame. And I was blessed that many of those Saturdays he invited me to tag along. So I got to do a lot of those crazy things. So that's how he really knows Coach Holtz. And we had one of the most incredible weekends ever. I think it was Thanksgiving weekend 1992 that we traveled to the University of Southern California with the football team, and got to just basically interact with them the entire weekend to a degree that I never dreamed of, if you ever dreamed of. But
no, and that's why I asked about the Gamecock helmet. I don't know if you ever. I think you met Chris. Chris Matlock was the equipment manager at Notre Dame for many years, and when Coach Holtz went to South Carolina, Chris went with him. And Chris is still at South Carolina today, not in the football program, but last I knew on
handling the equipment management for a girls basketball team, and which just had a national championship within the last few years. So I know it's been exciting times for him. And I guess one of the reasons I pointed that out, years ago, and Paul Harvey called me in like 1988 out of the clear blue and said, "Chief, what are you doing Saturday?" And I said, "I don't know. I have to check with the home front." And he said, "Well, Southern California is coming to town this weekend, and Coach, who was the coach at the time? I can't even remember the coach, but the coach
was it prior to Larry Smith.
It might have been Larry.
What year was
Larry.
it?
88, 89, something, right?
Yeah, it could have been in that territory.
But he said, we need some help because they're going to stay in Benton Harbor.
Mm-hmm. The Holiday Inn.
The Holiday Inn,
yep.
Yes. And that was the first time a visiting team had actually stayed at that hotel. But they needed the space, and they didn't want to be near campus, to kind of get separation from all the activity. And that started then, and it continued for nearly 20 years.
We had some fun.
Yes,
we had some fun.
It was a great time, and I think the privilege of being on the visiting side of the ball was I built a lot of relationships over the years with
other campuses.
Other coaches, and it's been fun to watch the coaches kind of progress over their careers. And
a couple that come back to mind. George Perlis from Michigan State. I enjoyed his talk. John Robinson from USC, when he came back to coach, that just being in that tunnel with that man, and
he's an awesome. He and his wife both, Linda, they were awesome people. Gracious host, and
play the song. I can't. Coach Robinson wanted the Notre Dame team to play the fight song, and the young man said he's not allowed to, and so he actually ran and got permission to do that and came back.
Yeah,
and
to fire up the Trojan team. So
yeah, and play that Notre Dame fight song, which was just, we saw so much leadership. I mean, different styles. Who are some of the leaders that you got to interact with, in that football environment that stood out to you, and what were their qualities?
They all approach their management of the team in a different fashion. Some were very hands-on. Like University of Southern California would come in on a Thursday night, and they would pretty much leave it to the athletic department or a person in the athletic department to arrange, hey, we'll be on the ground in South Bend, Indiana at this time. We need to be at the hotel. We're going to do this and this over the next couple days. And then other coaches would be more hands-on with every movement that the team did. Some wanted total isolation of the team. Others wanted a more open, fun, atmosphere in the evening. So they all approached it different. But I think John Robinson sticks out in my mind, not only because I traveled with them a lot and their security detail at USC.
Yeah, you got to be good friends, Xavier.
Yeah, Xavier passed away not too long ago, and God bless him.
I think you mentioned that to me in that text to me that Xavier passed away. What an awesome, what a blessing it was to meet those guys.
Oh yeah, but his son-in-law was with LAPD, his daughter was with LAPD, so great connections, and all these connections kind of come together. So when I fold that football experience back into what it does for me today, if I fast forward to my days at AHOC, one of the people on my team was a gentleman, again, as we get older, we say this more often, he recently passed away, Malcolm Carson, who Malcolm played for Chattanooga, was in the NFL for 4 or 5 years. And he went out and focused on sales and healthcare after his football career. So he was my healthcare rep who had close ties to Chris Matlock going back to Chattanooga. So, all these things kind of seem to come full circle.
Yes, they do.
Particularly in football, it's a very small group of people. But I would say that same thing in law enforcement. My contacts in Arizona and Hawaii and even down in Florida, I still have those contacts today, built from those football days.
You mentioned do right, Lou Holtz's that philosophy that was that we got to hear so often.
Oh yeah,
And sitting in those locker rooms and listening to him talk to his players before and after a game, was just incredible. I kind of think that maybe he and John Gruden never had a conversation.
Some coaches approach it a little differently. I will say that, not to name names, but some were, a little more pointed in their approach. And I think the more successful ones did right by their players, did right by their institutions, and represented a good face.
Yes. Well, I'll interrupt you there. I'm not a Michigan State fan by any chance. I'm a huge Michigan fan, Florida fan, Michigan fan. George Perlis was a very tough man, but a very fair man.
Yes.
I can say his leadership style. He coached Michigan State back in the mid-'80s through, for quite a while, mid-'80s through the mid-'90s, maybe in that area, someplace. And Dan and I got to sit in that locker room with him prior to the Notre Dame-Michigan State game, which is a huge rivalry game up in the upper Midwest there. What a classy guy. He was the ability to blend steel-hearted toughness with compassion.
Right.
And I loved his leadership style.
Yeah, they would arrive, and it was always, you felt very welcomed and part of the organization. Even though they're just getting, because that was a drive, that wasn't
Yes.
a flight. So it was a 2-hour drive down the interstate, and they'd pull into the Holiday Inn, and we would greet them, and we would go from there. But they usually would come on Friday, and the game was the very next day. But even that evening, a lot of coaches don't want a lot of fan interaction with the team in the evening. He would be more open to have the parents and family and some of the alumni come in, speak to the players, and do those types of activities till about 8 or 9 o'clock. Then he said, okay, it's time to focus on business. And so during the meal hour, he was open to have that interaction. And but he was just an awesome individual to deal with. Generally when we would do those games, and I think you remember Billy King from the state police.
Yes,
I did
yep,
those.
Billy.
Billy lives in Miami now.
Does
Actually,
he?
yes.
He went with us to
USC.
to
yeah,
USC.
yeah.
It was you and Billy and Denny Doc and myself, the
Yep,
four
yeah.
of us.
Maybe Potts went along too. Tom Potts.
Was Potts with us that
He
time?
might have. Maybe not.
I,
but
uh,
Tom's
maybe-
been there though.
Yeah.
He's, but we would be in uniform, and we would deal with Coach Perlis, and I mean, those guys have a lot on their mind, and I always thought this was a kind of a special touch. When he would go back to the university Monday or Tuesday, I would get a package at the door, and it would either be a ball cap or a Spartan shirt or something. Even though I'm an avid Notre Dame guy, he would, just a little thank you and appreciation for what we did, and I always thought that was a special touch, and it tells you that, it would always tell me his heart was in the right place.
Who the person is, and that it comes to that respect. We're talking leadership here with Dan Robinson, and if I refer to Dan as Chief, I never call I don't even know if I knew his first name for so long. It was just Chief. That's all we called him, Chief.
When I go, it's funny. My wife will go back to Michigan for a visit, and everybody calls me Chief, and down here nobody calls me Chief.
So
it really throws her off.
I'll try to stay on the formal name.
No, that's all right.
Yet we're talking leadership, and in talking about Coach George Perlis, which again, a tough offensive lineman, tough NFL veteran that just was a hardcore tough man. But the way he handled himself earned that respect. And it wasn't the toughness that always earned the respect, it was the compassionate side.
Yep.
Because what you're talking about is not what a tough man he was. You're talking about the respect you have from him just for the little details, the caring for other people that went on.
Yeah, I mean, I think as a leader, whether you're a police officer, police chief, or whether you're running a sales organization, I've been blessed to run pretty large organizations, as a director or an executive, to, just being an individual contributor. And I like both. Mm-hmm. But what you do today to kind of move the needle will be easily forgotten tomorrow when the needle goes the other way a little bit. But what you do today to treat people right, to instill that respect, to instill those objectives of the organization, people will always be encouraged to rally behind you. And I think in the case of George Perlis, maybe he wasn't successful all the time on the field or came at it as a hard charger to get the job done. At the end of the day, the team, the fans, everybody really rallied behind him because of the individual that he was.
And the opposing people, too. I mean, again, I wasn't a fan, but I was a fan of him.
Yep.
We're going to be taking a break here, take a couple-minute break. We'll come back. When we come back, I'm going to delve into a trip to Southern California that Dan and I went on that just was a leadership experience. And when we come back, we'll touch into that, and we'll talk about some Dale Carnegie things and some individuals and different classes that are coming up. If you have any questions, please go to Facebook Live, send us a note. Just put it down in the comment section for Dan, for myself, anything that you want to know. If we don't know the answer, Dan will make it up. I'm only kidding. This is Motivation U, the podcast. My name is Bob Ganzak. We'll be back right after this.
We still hear it. The sound of victory. The joy of being part of something great. And while things may not be the same right now, we haven't gone anywhere. If you bleed orange and blue, then Meldon Law is the firm for you.
Looking for more reasons to celebrate? We have them here at Celebration Point. Enjoy some of the newest additions to our already celebratory lineup, like Dave & Buster's, Les Macarons, and Prime and Pearl. There's always a reason to celebrate. Join us anytime for any occasion. Celebration Point, where Gators come to celebrate.
Oh my gosh, I can't even believe this. Look what you have done to my truck.
Excuse me, it's your fault, it's not my fault.
Yes, it is your fault. I am calling Jeffrey Meldon from Meldon Law.
So I'm gonna call Jeffrey, my husband.
Meldon Law, this is Jeffrey speaking.
Jeffrey! This crazy lady here, this crazy lady, he might...
New client?
Yes, but this one might be a little tricky.
Welcome back to Motivation U, the podcast. My guest, Dan Robinson, the chief, as I like to refer to him as, because he was chief of police in Lincoln Township, right over there. And right here, if you're a Michigan person, that's how we tell individuals where we lived. I grew up over here. Dan's job was right there. Ann Arbor is right about there. Yeah. Anyways. If you have any questions, please chime in. We're here at the great Coach's Podcast Room at Spurrier's Gridiron Grill and Visors upstairs. We'll go upstairs. I'll give you a tour when we're done. But there's a rooftop bar here called Visors, and it's got a retractable roof. The food here is incredible. I mean,
it's a beautiful.
Andrew,
beautiful
you see Andrew Johnstone walking around. He's the managing partner, and you met Freddie, and Coach shows up once in a while, and often. I shouldn't say once in a while, but you'll see Coach around here a lot, and so this is an incredible place to do this show from. Let's jump back into our trip back in 1992, because there were some leadership. A couple of leadership things that just changed my life. Dan and I were invited. I don't know who invited us. You invited me, and
yeah, I think back. Coach Robinson was there at the time, and when John was coaching at USC, I was always invited back for. They had a home game that year. I think it's the even year. Notre Dame at home at the Coliseum, and then the following week was their grand finale with UCLA up at the Rose Bowl. So I would come for the USC game, which was always that Thanksgiving weekend generally, and then stay for the week and go to the UCLA game. So
that would be a great time. Well, in '92, I can remember the couple of days before we flew out with the team. Dan and I went down to the Notre Dame bookstore and bought ourselves some khaki pants and some blue Notre Dame shirts because we were, you know, it was like dressed like, you know, the coaches. You're going to have sideline passes and everything. And we had an incredible time. We got to stay at the hotel with the team and, you know, through their pregame meetings. And we got in a caravan. There were like 2 or 3 buses that the team was on. And then there was a number of vehicles behind that. And Billy King was driving our vehicle, I believe, that day, or you may have, one of the
I don't
two
even
of you.
remember, yeah.
And we were in line. We were near the end of the police escort. And as we were going to the stadium from our hotel, all of a sudden we took a sidebar. We took Coach Holtz called an audible and took us through, well, describe where we went through.
So basically, it was Figueroa going right up through South Central, coming into the south side of the Coliseum. So instead of going up the Harbor Freeway and getting off and going, just dumping off into the Coliseum, he decided to go up through the neighborhood, which created a little turmoil for the police department. But the good, you know, LAPD does just a phenomenal job escorting these teams, and they have.
I mean, it wasn't that long after the riots revolving around
within a year
Rodney
or so, yeah.
King at that point. So, but the reason that we did that was there was a player on Notre Dame's team that was from that section of town.
Correct.
And Coach Holtz wanted his entire team to see where one of their teammates came from. Wanted them to experience that because that's part of education. And Coach Holtz, I always loved him for that, is that he wanted the student athlete, what I saw with my eyes, he wanted the student athlete to experience the entire opportunity in life. It wasn't just the football game. It was who we are, where we come from, and how we get to success. Yep. And that was awesome about Coach.
Yeah, he was just a phenomenal, not just a speaker, but he just had a phenomenal heart. And I still see it today. I mean, I have not spoken to Coach Holtz in probably 20 years since he left Notre Dame. Mm-hmm. But he was also the guy we could go in and make contact either with his secretary or somebody else on the team. And somebody in the community may need something. We may need, you know, maybe it's just a simple letter of encouragement or, you know, thank you for doing the right thing in this particular incident. You know, and those are big deals for a police chief to be able to get the head coach at Notre Dame to write a letter to some local person that, you know, may have went above and beyond. And he was always willing to give that back to the community. So without question, you know, and I think that this was just another phase in that process of, you know, you really need to see what your teammates, you know, not everybody comes from South Bend, Indiana or Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And, you know, every community has its good spots and bad spots, and this just happened to be.
Notre Dame's not easy to get into. It's not inexpensive to go to. It's everything around it. So a lot of the young men may have come from areas that are more quote unquote privileged, and for them to experience other things, you can talk about it. Mm-hmm. You know, you can talk about it, but when you live it, it's a little bit different. I'll tell you something else he did, Dan, that day after the game, which Notre Dame won pretty handedly.
Now, John wouldn't appreciate you reminding him of that.
Well, it was Larry Smith that was the coach.
Oh, was Larry at that one?
Because that was the last game he ever coached. Remember, he came into the locker room.
Yep.
Larry Smith, the USC coach, that's another subject I'll talk about in a second, and we can discuss in a moment. But after the game, all of the coaches go into a room, and Coach Holtz goes in to talk to his assistant coaches. Players are in the locker room getting changed, and the assistant coaches are sitting in a little room by themselves, and Coach Holtz goes in to talk to them. And I don't know why or how. I never got a chance to ask him that, but he tugged me on the shirt and he said, "You want to come in here with us?" And I grabbed Denny Doc, and the two of us went in and sat down to listen to his post-game discussion. And I'll tell you, I don't know if Coach Holtz ever went through the Dale Carnegie program. He personified what we teach in the Dale Carnegie class. He went to every one of his coaches and gave them sincere appreciation with an example of what their
contribution was.
What their, the team, the part of the team that they coach, whatever if they were linebackers coach, defensive back coaches, and he had a specific thing about each one and gave appreciation to every one of those coaches. And I mean, I sat there and I had just recently graduated in 91 from the Dale Carnegie course, so it was kind of like fresh in my mind. I'm going, wow, that's what we learned in class. He was just that consummate people person.
Yep.
He is that consummate people person.
Absolutely.
Still around. The other side is when he had Coach Larry Smith come in and address. He came in with his family. I mean, he knew losing this game, he was probably going to get fired.
Right.
And I can still see him standing up on that platform in the Notre Dame locker room, thanking the Notre Dame players for the way they played the game. I mean, I was like, we are seeing something that you just don't see all the time.
Yeah, you don't see that on the back end of the television presentation. A lot of things go on in the background. These coaches are human beings. They know how to manage. They know how to lead. They know what it takes to drive success, and they exemplify it almost each and every day. And Larry Smith was a great guy too.
Yes, he was a very nice man.
He just had trouble pulling it together with the crew he had at the time, but. In terms of his personality, I don't think there was anybody on the team that didn't want to give 100%.
No,
so
that was very evident too when we were there, that they loved him. The team played hard for him.
Yep, and I think John is an example of he couldn't get it fine-tuned enough at the end.
The second time,
right,
yes.
right, and it's like when you're a football coach, at least in my mind, and I'm by no means the expert there, but it just looks like, hey, all these assistant coaches are running their own each individual division. And if one breaks, just like in private industry, if one breaks, the supply, like most people are suffering from supply chain issues right now. If that breaks, it affects the rest of the organization. And it's
happened in the radio business. If the engineering department went down and we were off the air, nobody else could do their job.
That means you couldn't say anything bad about me on the morning news.
We didn't say a lot of bad things about you, but but we used to have a lot of fun with that. But that's right. They all work together, and how that interaction. You left Michigan and you moved to the Atlanta area?
Yeah, I went to Atlanta with the U.S. Department of Transportation National Highway Traffic Safety Administration.
That was something you were getting into even when you were in Lincoln Township, of recreating automobile accidents.
I did that even before Lincoln Township. I did that.
And then was that part of what you were doing in Atlanta, or what was that?
Well, actually, the focus in Atlanta was, I was fortunate enough in my early career to become a traffic crash reconstructionist, and did traffic homicide cases, serious injury cases, as well as my regular duties. In that part of Michigan, it's, thank goodness we didn't have a fatality every day, but they were more common than we cared to have.
Yeah, unfortunately.
And there was a group of us from, Jerry Kearns from the state police, myself, and we all worked together. If it was big enough, we would just come together and help one another. In my time in Michigan, I took a real interest in highway safety. And there was also an ability to get additional funding from the federal government to support highway safety programs. And I served on the Highway Traffic Safety Committee for the Michigan Association of Chiefs of Police And we developed a program in concert with our Office of Highway Traffic and Safety. There was a governor's rep, Betty Mercer was the director of that organization at the time. And an idea was transformed over how can we increase seatbelt usage. At the time, we don't even think about it today. I see very few people not buckle
Nobody.
in.
Well, thankfully, the cars too. You don't want to sit there and listen to that beep, 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 beep.
Right. Yeah,
It's
the
not comfortable to
manufacturers
put it behind
have
you.
made it kind of difficult too. But we really wanted to increase seatbelt use because we knew between alcohol and the lack of seatbelt use, that was the biggest two factors in auto crashes. So we launched a program that actually reached out, and unfortunately our minority communities tended to be the ones that were the most severely impacted, either because of the equipment or they weren't buckling in. So we had to figure out a way to deliver a message to our minority communities, our across the board, but a more focused message here, maybe a different message here to increase, it was really a targeted, I want to say, ad campaign to get everyone in the state on board, be it youth, be it older people, because a lot of older people didn't want to buckle up. They didn't like it.
Because they didn't grow up with it at that time. I mean, I don't think I ever remember my dad putting on a seatbelt.
My father never did either. Yeah.
They
So
were
he did
always,
later on in life, but
they were always stuffed in the seats.
or
you had to,
latching it behind them
you
or
had to
something.
go down and, well, the old cars, you had to go reach your hand in there to find the seatbelts.
Right. So this group came together and we came up with the ad campaign, which the radio stations were gracious to give us free advertising, as well as TV stations, called Click It or Ticket.
Gracious, and we're made to do that.
We might have twisted it.
We have no choice.
Yes.
The FCC tells you you're going to do this. Okay?
But you could have buried us on nights.
Yeah,
you guys
no, we did a good job.
You were good. You targeted the message, and part of that campaign was to target the message to the right people. Like if we were targeting young people, it might be during a football game or during a NASCAR event or something that we knew this audience may be listening to. So that program was very successful. We increased, because there was no law that mandated seatbelt usage. It was a secondary law. There was no,
That's a huge part of leadership. I mean, to be able to pull people together to get a message like that out throughout the country.
Yep.
I mean, we're not talking about Lincoln Township. We're talking about getting it out to a number of people.
That's when I retired from law enforcement. I had 25 years and retired, and the regional administrator from this region of the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration wanted somebody to begin to promote this program on a national level, but they wanted to start in the Southeast, which just coincidentally had one of the lower seatbelt usage rates.
Okay.
So I came to the Atlanta office, and my job was to go out and promote Click It or Ticket. The message behind it was, not only was the advertising important and it was all free, we did get Congress when I was at NHTSA to pay advertising for the first time for any kind of these ad campaigns, because they even saw the increase in seatbelt usage. So we were getting 20 and 30 point increases in seatbelt usage. Wow. And the ultimate goal was to try to convince state legislatures and governments that a primary seatbelt law was essential, was a good idea, reduced fatalities. In doing this voluntary program and getting people to come along on their own and increasing those rates and lowering those fatalities, it became almost a no-brainer for most of the state legislatures to do that.
So what we learned from that, and from a standpoint of leadership, is that the same application happens in with a team. You've got like a restaurant where you need to implement something. You've got to prove to them that you're methodology, your system, your idea is going to work. So it took, a long time and a lot of proof that that methodology was going to work. A lot of investment, both of people's time, their mental capacity to invest in it, plus the financial investment that had to be made, and getting people to buy in. It's no different than running a small store, or like here at Celebration Point, one of the small shops here. It's the same thing.
Absolutely.
You want to get people to buy in.
Getting you to run that advertising at a slot where we needed it, to getting the churches in the community to come on board with maybe a targeted population that we needed help with. Just schools, it was across the board. So, you really, and it's that way in any organization.
So the chief of police in Lincoln Township, was that an elected position, or was that an appointed position? Or
so that was an appointed position. In 1987, they formed the department. It was a consolidation of a township police department and a village police department brought into one that was originally under the contract by the sheriff's office.
Okay.
Nick Jewell was the sheriff at the time.
I remember that.
Nick
yes.
still, I just talked to him a couple years ago, and he was in the Blossom Time Parade in one of the old police cars. But Nick's doing well, and long retired now.
Yeah. I moved there in '88.
Okay.
So
yeah,
it was
we
1
started
year after you started.
Started in October of '87, and it was I've always been
The pagodas. That's where
oh
I
yeah,
lived there for
down on the beach.
6 months until until we bought a house.
I'd forgotten about the pagodas. So Nick was instrumental. He was a great mentor and instrumental in me having the opportunity to go after that position, and other people along the way have really set me up for success to take the next one. You just got to have the willingness to take that step, and make sure it's as best you can that it is the right step for you. So
where were you first a police officer?
First was in Hartford, Michigan, up in
Okay.
Van Buren County,
All right.
and then I worked for the county for a while. And I was in Cass County, which is Dowagiac, Cassopolis. I was in Cass County about 9 or 10 years, something like that, and then nearly 14 years at.
How did you get involved in Lincoln Township?
Well, I was at Cass County, and they were looking to form this department, and I had put my application in. I was very interested in originally it was to kind of run maybe a contract department under Sheriff Jewell, and so I had put my request in to be considered for that position, and it eventually became, well, it's not going to be running, a division in the sheriff's department, a contract division. It's going to be actually running your own department, because the township, Bob Rutsatz at the time, said, we're not going to pay somebody else to do policing that could pull. We want some local control.
So that leadership side of it was, it was almost like, I don't want to say it this way. You bit off a lot. You thought you were biting one chunk. You were biting the entire.
It was the whole tamale, and it was hot.
Beast.
So, I can remember when we started the police department. We had.
So you were the first police chief.
I was the first police chief, first officer. We had no uniforms, no patrol cars.
I learned something, 30 years later that I didn't know.
And then Dan Sullivan was my first hire, and Dan was the number 2 guy under me.
Yeah.
I retired. Dan stayed and retired 2 years ago.
So they've only had basically 3 now.
Gary Soper is the police chief now, who was one of our hires as well. So great continuity, very low turnover.
Yes.
I would say less than 2 or 3% turnover. I mean, the guys that you knew when you were back there, most of them are still there.
Well, we are all getting a little older. Coach Doc, one of the most incredible high school football coaches that you would ever want to meet. If you ever saw his team in the locker room after a game, they were the smallest, littlest, lightest kids, and they would go out and beat, because of technique and attitude, the biggest, baddest teams in the state. I mean, that was what Lakeshore High School was. It was just absolutely incredible. So, and also one of the winningest girls softball coaches in the history of the state of Michigan. A number of state titles. So we got to work and
those Friday
interact
night
with some incredible
those
people.
Friday night football games at home. We had to add extra police staff at the field just for traffic control, and I mean they were well attended events. It was crazy.
Yeah, and the other side of that was the discussions at the restaurants where the coaches went, where there were no players, were so much fun after the games, just to hear, the banter back and forth.
Down in Baroda after the game.
Yeah, that was always
Sure.
a good time. I always had a good time. I started something last week. I started a little thing called RPS, which was that relentless pursuit of success. And I was talking to you beforehand that the first person that I named in that area was my son, Matt, because of his desire and drive. And you and I were talking before the show, and I said, today's recipient of my verbiage is Tom Brady. Well, there's something about Mr. Brady. First of all, 44 years of age, leading the NFL in passing yards at 44. But he's not doing that because some quirk of fate or something else. And it reminds me of another individual that went through a similar transformational part of a sport many years ago, about 25 years ago, Tiger Woods. Tiger Woods transformed golf. Up to that point, golfers were guys that smoked cigarettes, walked down the field, pot belly, a few beers, and warming up to play a round of golf was a small bucket of balls, and they hit the balls. They didn't practice during the week. They just kind of played. Tiger Woods came along and revolutionized the sport. And I think what we're watching right now is we're watching a man do what Tiger Woods did 25 years ago. He's revolutionizing the sport of football, if not the way people conduct themselves. It's his diet. It's the way he mentally prepares himself. He physically prepares himself. Football used to be a sport. I don't know if you played it, but football used to be a sport that, the players went to training camp to get in shape. Now, if you're not in shape to go to training camp, you get cut.
Right.
And Tom Brady has kind of revolutionized that it's 365, it's 24/7, it's every single day of our lives, no matter what industry or what field you're in sales, marketing now. That's a full-time job.
Yeah.
I mean, are you going out as a leader? Are you going out to the bar on Friday night and letting your team see you do things that maybe you shouldn't be doing? That doesn't happen in that world when you have a relentless pursuit of success. We have a minute and a half going here. What are your thoughts on that relentless pursuit of success, and how do you set the bar in that quickly?
Well, I think you always got to be looking to go to the next level. I'm 64 years old now, and I should be looking at retirement, and I don't see it in my future. I'm looking always to do the next thing, take on the next task. And to do that, you just need to be as mentally prepared as you can be. Understand what you're about to get into and do it better than anybody else can do it, if at all possible. Or at least prepare yourself to do the best you can. And I think if you get up every day with that in mind, and I think Tom Brady, I'm not a Patriots fan, I'm not a Tampa Bay, even though they're starting to tilt me because they're a Florida team, I think he does that each and every day. He finishes one game on Sunday or whatever the day may be, immediately the next day he's preparing for the next task.
It's the attention to detail and taking care of what you can control.
Yeah.
And not getting wrapped up in other things. Thank you for being here today.
Thanks, Bob. It was great
We'll
seeing
do this
you
again.
Yes.
And we're going to have to break bread sometime.
Yep.
I promise you, I will have on the website, jacksonville.dalecarnegie.com, I promise you, we will have the new classes this weekend. Liz told me we would. For my engineer, Evan Miller, my name's Bob Ganzak from the Coaches Podcast Room at Spurrier's Gridiron Grill at Celebration Point. This is Motivation U, the podcast.